The sharp crack of a hand striking flesh echoed through the marble-lined lobby of Monarch Financial Bank. For a breathless instant, the sound alone seemed to silence the room. Customers froze mid-sentence. A teller's hand hovered in mid-air above a counting machine. A child clutched his mother's arm, wide-eyed, as if he had witnessed something forbidden. Standing at the center of it all was Preston Reed, customer service manager, his name badge glinting under the spotless ceiling lights. His palm was still raised, the imprint of his action branded across the cheek of the woman before him. Her head had snapped slightly to the side from the force, yet she did not stagger, nor did she retreat. Her eyes locked onto his with a steady defiance that unsettled even those who had chosen to look away. "We don't serve your kind here." Preston's voice rang out, every syllable stretched to reach every corner of the room. He wanted witnesses. He wanted dominance. 2 uniformed security guards rushed forward, not to restrain him, but to flank the woman he had struck. "You're under arrest, ma'am," one of them barked, as if the decision had already been made. A murmur swelled across the room. Bones lifted into the air, cameras focused, lenses blinking. Some customers looked uneasy, shifting their weight, but unwilling to interfere. Others leaned forward, curious, hungry for spectacle. Yet no one stepped between the woman and the men surrounding her. Her cheek glowed red where Preston's hand had landed, but her posture remained upright, almost regal. Instead of answering with rage, she adjusted the cardigan draped over her shoulders and spoke in a voice level enough to be heard over the ringing silence. "I believe there's been a mistake," she said, her words crisp, calm, deliberate. But Preston wasn't finished. His chest heaved with the smug satisfaction of someone who thought he had won. "I've already called the police. You can explain yourself downtown." The words hit like another strike, but not to her face, to her dignity. She did not flinch. She did not yield. The crowd, however, leaned closer. Fingers scrolled across glowing screens, live broadcasts beginning to filter out beyond the polished walls of the bank. Whatever was about to unfold would not remain contained in that room. And you, watching this now, know exactly what those recordings mean. If you stand against prejudice in places where fairness should be the rule, not the exception, make sure you support this channel. Like and subscribe so you never miss stories that reveal truths people would rather keep hidden. And let us know in the comments the country you're watching from, because these injustices reach far beyond one city or one lobby. Back in the bank, the woman's eyes never left Preston's. She seemed to study him, not his rage, but the insecurity trembling just beneath it. Her silence was heavier than any protest could have been. "Escort her out," Preston ordered, as if the decision were his alone. The guards tightened their circle. The nearest officer reached for her wrist. Customers shifted, a few gasps breaking through as the reality set in. They were watching a woman being criminalized in real time for nothing more than standing at a counter. One elderly man muttered, "This doesn't feel right," but even his voice quickly trailed off, drowned by the hum of recording devices. The woman breathed slowly, the air steadying her as the red mark on her cheek darkened. Instead of resisting, she spoke again, softer this time but firm enough to pierce through the noise. "Are you certain you know who you're putting your hands on?" The guard hesitated, hand half closed around her wrist. Preston snapped, "Don't listen to her. Just do your job." Another ripple moved through the crowd. Doubt was seeping in. Even those who had chosen silence could feel it. Something about this confrontation was about to shift. The woman straightened her shoulders, every movement deliberate. She looked neither humiliated nor defeated. Instead, there was a quiet gravity about her that unsettled the room more than Preston's shouting ever could. For all the force of his hand, for all the authority of his title, Preston Reed had no idea who he had just struck. And in a matter of moments, the truth would fall on him harder than any slap ever could. Long before the marble floors of Monarch Financial reflected her shadow, Zora Timberlake had already walked paths far rougher. The daughter of a hospital janitor and a public school teacher, she grew up knowing that every opportunity she touched would come at the cost of sacrifice. Summers that others spent at camp, Zora spent cleaning offices alongside her father or sorting library returns to help her mother buy groceries. Nothing was handed down to her but the lesson that dignity could survive even in scarcity. By the time she entered college, survival wasn't enough. She carried the weight of her parents' sacrifices like armor, determined to forge a life that proved their effort had meaning. While classmates partied in dorm basements, Zora was working 3 jobs: tutoring, waitressing, and shelving books in the campus library until midnight. Each paycheck went not only toward tuition, but toward easing her parents' endless grind. The universe didn't grant her favors, but it gave her resolve. That resolve became steel when she fell in love, married, and then, far too soon, became a widow. At 28, with a baby in her arms and grief too heavy for her young shoulders, she faced the choice that defines the rare few who rise above: surrender to despair or turn pain into propulsion. Zora chose propulsion. While raising her son alone, she earned an MBA, writing papers with one hand while rocking a crib with the other. Nights blurred into mornings, but her focus never faltered. She wasn't just climbing, she was building. Timberlake Financial was born in a rented room with one desk and a second-hand computer. Clients were skeptical at first. A black woman in finance didn't fit the picture most had been taught to trust. She met their skepticism, not with anger, but with relentless performance. She didn't just manage accounts, she grew them. She didn't just offer financial advice, she delivered transformations. Word spread. Small businesses that once scraped by under predatory loan terms found themselves thriving after her guidance. Community organizations that had been denied access to mainstream banks built wealth through her firm. Families who thought home ownership was impossible signed deeds because Zora saw possibility where others saw risk. Brick by brick, deal by deal, she built an empire. From a one-room office, Timberlake Financial grew into a powerhouse with assets exceeding $9 billion. Her face graced the covers of Forbes, Black Enterprise, and the Wall Street Journal. She became a keynote speaker at global conferences, her words dissected by investors who once would have ignored her entirely. But success never hardened her heart. She funneled millions into scholarships for first-generation college students, built community centers in neighborhoods long starved of resources, and endowed hospital wings in her parents' honor. Everywhere her name appeared, it carried weight. Everywhere, except where it mattered most on that fateful day. The branch lobby of Monarch Financial. There, stripped of tailored suits and diamond pins, she had made herself appear as ordinary as any other middle-class customer. Off-the-rack cardigan, plain blouse, sensible shoes, contact lenses in place of the signature glasses that investors recognized instantly. Even her braids, usually styled immaculately, were tucked beneath a simple headscarf. The transformation wasn't vanity, it was strategy. She wanted no armor, no shield of status. She wanted to know how the bank treated those who walked in without prestige stitched into their clothing. She wanted to see, in unfiltered detail, whether anything had changed since her grandmother's day. Because Zora's wealth could buy her comfort, but it could not erase memory. Her grandmother Eloise had once entered this same bank decades ago, paperwork in hand, seeking nothing more extravagant than a home loan she more than qualified for. The rejection, wrapped in coded language about neighborhoods and requirements, had cost her the dream of passing down property, the cornerstone of generational wealth. That wound had passed silently through her family, as real as any scar. Now, standing in the very institution she secretly owned, Zora Timberlake had chosen invisibility. She chose to walk through those doors as if she were no one. Because the truth she sought couldn't be revealed to a Forbes cover star, but to the woman beneath all the accolades. The woman who might be dismissed, doubted, or denied. And so she had stripped herself of recognition, entering Monarch Financial not as the titan of banking she was, but as the granddaughter of Eloise Jenkins, the widow who built an empire from ashes, the mother still fighting to make sure her son inherited a world more just than the one she had endured. What Preston Reed could not know, what no one in that lobby had realized, was that the woman he dared to strike was already the rightful owner of every dollar moving through that building. And his downfall had already begun. Every empire has a starting point, and for Zora Timberlake, the roots of this story stretched backward long before she signed her first deal. They reached into her grandmother's hands, steady hands holding neatly organized loan paperwork, hands that had scrubbed floors and balanced books to prepare for a single dream. A house of her own. Eloise Jenkins walked into Monarch Financial in 1993 with everything lenders claimed to require. She had a stable income, spotless credit, and decades of work history. She had done everything the system demanded. Yet when her application was processed, the bank found new requirements. They told her homes in her chosen neighborhood carried different standards. They asked for extra documentation that wasn't on any official list. They shifted the goalposts, one invisible inch at a time, until approval became impossible. Eloise walked out without a loan, her dreams of ownership smothered in polite rejection letters. The denial wasn't just about her. It meant her children and grandchildren inherited rent receipts instead of deeds. It meant wealth drained out of her pockets into someone else's property portfolio. Generational equity stolen, not with violence, but with a signature and a stamp. That injustice lived in Zora like a pulse. She heard it in her mother's weary sighs whenever rent went up. She saw it in her father's tired walk home from double shifts, knowing the family's labor enriched landlords instead of building their own future. She grew up watching what should have been attainable security turned into a lifetime of scraping by. So when the chance came to buy Monarch Financial itself, Zora didn't hesitate. 3 weeks before Preston Reed raised his hand in that lobby, she had quietly acquired the institution through a holding company. The deal was signed, the contracts sealed, but the announcement hadn't yet reached the public. Only the board of directors and a few high-ranking executives were aware that the face of their new owner was a black woman. It would have been easy to walk in as herself. In her tailored navy suits, her diamond-studded glasses, her reputation carried by every headline that had praised her. But that would reveal nothing about how the average customer was treated. Because banks are experts at putting on performances. They polish their annual reports, parade their community donations, and highlight a handful of diversity hires. They'll show you numbers, graphs, and glossy brochures. But numbers don't capture a sneer from across a desk. Statistics can't show how often one customer is told to use the ATM, while another is ushered into private consultation. Zora knew it too well. Numbers hide bias. Only lived experience uncovers it. That belief drove her to strip away her recognizable armor of wealth and status. She wanted to walk through those same doors in a cardigan and slacks, as her grandmother once had, to test whether the poison still lingered beneath the polished brass fixtures. Her executive team had tried to talk her out of it. "We can send mystery shoppers," one argued. "We can audit the staff," said another. But Zora shook her head. Audits and reports only show what people allow you to see. Bias doesn't appear on balance sheets. Discrimination doesn't surface in shareholder updates. To expose it, you had to feel it. You had to risk being dismissed, doubted, or denied. She had chosen the branch carefully. Not the gleaming flagship downtown, but the location tied to her family's wound. To her, this wasn't just another acquisition. It was a return, a confrontation with the very institution that had written rejection into her family's history. Every step she took inside that bank was both present and past. She was the billionaire CEO who had built an empire, and she was the granddaughter carrying Eloise's rejection letter like an invisible weight in her handbag. She was power disguised as vulnerability, walking into a space designed to remind people like her of their place. And that was the test. Would Monarch Financial, under its old leadership, treat her with fairness? Or would history repeat itself in the same lobby with different names but identical prejudices? She didn't have to wait long for the answer. Preston Reed had already made sure of that. Tuesday morning, the branch doors of Monarch Financial swung open to admit a woman who looked like any other working professional. Cardigan draped neatly across her shoulders, modest blouse tucked into navy slacks, a handbag worn enough to suggest use, not wealth. To onlookers, she was simply another face in the weekday rush, blending into the muted rhythm of the lobby. Yet behind that plain exterior stood the owner of the bank itself. Zora joined the line near the front counter, her posture patient, her eyes sharp. She wasn't there for theatrics, she was there to listen, to watch, to feel. Every minute mattered. 2 customers ahead of her, a man in his 50s wearing a tailored blazer, stepped up to the reception area. He introduced himself, and before he could finish his sentence, the receptionist smiled and waved over a personal banker. "Right this way, sir," she said warmly. The man was escorted into a private office with polished glass walls. Next, an elderly couple shuffled forward, clutching a folder thick with paperwork. Their tone carried confusion. They weren't sure about retirement accounts, they said. Instantly, a banker materialized at their side, ushering them towards seats and pouring them water. The staff leaned in with patience, nodding along, explaining options with a calm that seemed rehearsed for VIP service. Zora noted every word, every gesture. None of it surprised her. She had been in banking long enough to know who received courtesy and who received condescension. When her turn arrived, she offered a polite smile to the young teller behind the counter. His nameplate read, Aiden Fox. He looked barely out of college, his tie knotted too tightly, his shirt starched stiff. "Good morning," Zora began evenly. "I'm new to the area. I'd like to open a checking and savings account, and I'd also like to learn about your investment services." For a second, Aiden blinked at her as though the request had been unusual. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, then hesitated. The warmth he had extended to the customers before her never appeared. "We have brochures," he finally said, pulling one from a neat stack. He slid it across the counter without meeting her eyes. "You can also find everything on our website. Honestly, it might be easier for you to use our ATM services to start." Zora's lips curved in the faintest smile. She knew that line. The redirection wrapped itself in the language of convenience, but underneath it lay dismissal. The ATM suggestion was never offered to the man in the blazer. It hadn't been mentioned to the elderly couple. It was a brush-off, polite on the surface, but heavy with assumption. "I'd prefer to speak with a banker in person," she replied, her tone as calm as her expression. Aiden's discomfort grew. He glanced past her toward the customer service desk. There, seated like a sentinel, was Preston Reed. His dark suit was tailored to perfection, his wristwatch gleaming under the lights. More than his clothes, it was the way he carried himself, chin tilted, gaze sharp, that declared his authority in the room. Aiden picked up the phone on his desk. "I have a walk-in asking for account services," he muttered into the receiver. A pause. "Yes, she's requesting a banker. I understand, okay." He set the phone down and forced a thin smile. "Our bankers are with clients at the moment. It could be a significant wait. Are you sure you wouldn't rather use our online portal? It's really quick." Before Zora could answer, Preston rose from his desk. His footsteps echoed as he approached, each one carrying an air of reluctant duty. He glanced at the brochure still lying on the counter, then at Zora, his expression tightening. "I understand you're interested in opening accounts," he said, voice smooth but clipped. "For new clients, our protocol recommends starting with online registration. That way, our staff isn't pulled from established relationships unnecessarily." The words struck Zora not as policy, but as performance. A way of saying, "You don't belong at my desk." "I prefer in-person banking," she said again, steady, unwavering. "I can wait for availability, or I'd be glad to schedule an appointment." Preston's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Without an existing relationship, there are requirements. Could I see some additional identification? Proof of address, perhaps?" She opened her purse and produced her driver's license and a recent utility bill. Preston held them up to the light, scrutinizing them as though they might dissolve into counterfeit. "Self-employed," he remarked, his tone thick with implication. "We'll also need tax returns and business documents before proceeding. Compliance is strict here." It wasn't true. None of those were necessary for opening a simple checking account. Yet he stood there, reciting obstacles with the kind of ease that comes only from repetition. Zora studied him silently, then nodded once. "Thank you for your time." Her voice carried no anger. She gathered her belongings, adjusted her cardigan, and walked calmly toward the exit. Behind her, Preston exhaled with satisfaction, as if he had protected the sanctity of the bank. Aiden busied himself with forms, his face pale but unwilling to interfere. And Zora, stepping into the street, knew exactly what she had witnessed. Not a misunderstanding, not a single man's bias, but the same invisible walls that had once blocked her grandmother. The first test was complete, and the results were written in prejudice. Wednesday morning, the lobby of Monarch Financial buzzed with its usual flow of midweek business. Suits shuffled toward teller lines, briefcases clicked shut, and the scent of polished wood mixed with the faint smell of fresh ink from transaction slips. Into that hum of activity walked Zora Timberlake once more. The same cardigan, the same simple blouse, but this time her handbag carried more than the basics. Inside was everything a bank could possibly ask for. A passport, driver's license, social security card, 2 utility bills, 3 months of bank statements, tax returns, even her business registration documents. If Preston Reed or anyone else planned to move the goalposts again, they would find no ground to stand on. She approached the reception desk calmly. The young woman stationed there smiled politely. "I have an appointment to open accounts this morning," Zora said evenly. The receptionist frowned, fingers skimming across her keyboard. "I don't see you listed here, ma'am. Are you sure it's this branch?" Zora nodded, sliding her portfolio onto the counter. "There must have been a miscommunication. I was told to return today with documentation. I have everything required." The receptionist's hesitation deepened. Before she could respond, Preston Reed appeared. He had been watching from his desk, the same tailored suit hugging his frame, expression sharpened into condescension. "Mr. Walsh," he called across the lobby, beckoning the branch manager from his office doorway. "This is the individual I mentioned yesterday." Zora caught the subtle emphasis on the word individual, not customer, not client, just individual. A reduction, spoken deliberately for his superior's ears. Bryson Walsh approached with the polished smile of a man who had spent decades masking prejudice with pleasantries. His salt and pepper hair was combed back meticulously, his cufflinks gleaming, his tone warm enough to play well with those who weren't listening too closely. "Good morning," Walsh said smoothly. "I understand there's been some confusion about an appointment." Zora opened her folder, laying out her documents in neat rows. "Not confusion. I was advised yesterday to return with identification and proof of income. Here is everything you may need." Walsh's eyes flicked over the papers, but his tone cooled. "As you may understand, our protocols for new clients are quite strict. Without an established relationship, we have to be certain of compliance." She watched the performance carefully, every word designed to sound neutral, every syllable masking what was truly being said. "You don't fit our definition of a valuable customer." "Of course," Zora replied, her voice calm but resolute. "That is why I've brought documentation exceeding your stated requirements." Walsh hesitated, a flicker of irritation flashing behind his professional mask. "Very well. Vivian Mercer will assist you." He gestured toward a woman seated at a side desk. Vivian stood slowly, gathering a notepad. Her face betrayed no warmth, only the weary detachment of someone who had been in banking long enough to perfect indifference. She motioned stiffly toward a chair. "Sit here," she said flatly. Zora obeyed, placing her folder of documents between them. "I'd like to open checking and savings accounts and inquire about your wealth management options." Vivian's eyes skimmed the paperwork. "We'll need time to review this thoroughly. Tax returns, credit reports, these things aren't processed in a single sitting." Zora arched an eyebrow. "Yesterday I observed another customer open accounts with just a driver's license and a utility bill." Vivian didn't look up. "Each case is unique. Risk factors vary." The phrase landed like a stone. Risk factors. It was the kind of coded language Zora had heard her entire life. A polite mask stretched over bias. The minutes dragged. Vivian asked for documents already in her hands. She highlighted lines, questioned legitimate entries, and took excessive notes. Her posture radiated delay, not service. Every question suggested suspicion, not assistance. Customers came and went. Zora remained seated, calm but unmoved. She had endured worse, and she knew the power of patience. Every second of that performance, every misplaced demand was being filed away in her mind. At last, Vivian stacked the papers neatly, her tone clipped. "We'll call you after further review. You may go now." Zora gathered her documents carefully, sliding them back into her folder. She stood, adjusted her cardigan, and offered a polite nod. "Thank you for your time." Her voice carried no trace of defeat, only resolve. As she stepped back into the lobby, Preston leaned casually against his desk, arms folded, smirk curling his lips. He thought the walls of procedure and protocol had closed around her. What he didn't realize was that those same walls were about to crumble, stone by stone, under the weight of the truth she carried with her. Friday morning, the lobby of Monarch Financial was busier than either of her earlier visits. Customers filled the teller line, murmurs echoing under the high ceiling, footsteps tapping across polished marble. The air carried that tense restlessness of payday. People in a hurry, transactions piling up. Zora entered quietly, her appearance unchanged. Modest cardigan, plain blouse, no trace of wealth in her attire. She carried the same portfolio, still brimming with documents that proved her eligibility a dozen times over. This was her third visit in as many days, and this time, the lobby had an audience. Preston Reed noticed her the moment she stepped through the glass doors. His jaw tightened. He whispered something to a teller, then straightened his suit jacket and strode across the floor. His voice boomed loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. There she is again, the same woman trying to pull the same tricks. Suspicious activity, folks. You've been warned. The words rippled through the room, sharp and deliberate. Heads turned. Eyes landed on Zora, questioning, judging. She stood still, her folder clutched in both hands, her voice calm when she answered. I came to open an account, like any other customer. I have every document you asked for. Preston snatched the folder from her grip, flipping it open theatrically. He plucked out her driver's license, held it aloft like a trophy, and turned it toward the onlookers. Zora Jenkins, he sneered, emphasizing the name she'd chosen for her undercover identity, her grandmother's maiden name. That's the story you're sticking to? He chuckled, shaking his head. Looks like someone's trying to play games with paperwork. Laughter fluttered uncertainly from a corner of the lobby. A few customers averted their eyes, uncomfortable but unwilling to interfere. Zora didn't flinch. That is my legal identification, she replied evenly. You are required to process it with the same respect you grant every other customer. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried across the lobby with a steady authority that unsettled Preston more than defiance would have. He stepped closer, his face twisted with the kind of hostility reserved for someone who believed his power would go unquestioned. You come in here day after day, wasting my staff's time, pretending you belong in this bank. Let me make this clear. People like you are better served elsewhere. Do you understand? Gasps broke out. A woman in line pressed her phone higher, recording every word. The tension in the room snapped taut. Zora lifted her chin. Her cheekbones caught the light, her eyes unshaken. All I ask, she said firmly, is the equal treatment this institution promises in its mission statement. The composure in her tone pierced him deeper than anger ever could. And in that moment, something inside Preston snapped. Without warning, his hand lashed out. The slap cracked through the air, louder than the shuffle of papers, louder than the hum of the lobby. Zora's head turned slightly from the blow, but her stance remained unbroken. Silence rushed in, then shattered. Gasps rippled. Bones shot upward, recording from every angle. A child whimpered. An elderly man muttered, "My God." Preston, chest heaving, barked at the guards. "Get her out of here. She's trespassing. She's committing fraud." Two security officers hurried forward, surrounding Zora. Their stances were firm, their eyes cold, as if they'd already judged her guilty. "You're under arrest, ma'am," one said stiffly, reaching for her arm. Zora's voice cut through the chaos, calm but sharp. "On what grounds?" Her words only deepened the unease that hung heavy in the air. The guards exchanged glances, but Preston barked louder. "Don't ask her questions. Just detain her. I've already called the police." The words sent another wave through the crowd. Some customers stepped back, pulling their children closer. Others whispered furiously, phones still filming. The bank lobby was no longer a place of business. It had become a stage for humiliation, for bias, for violence masquerading as procedure. Zora stood at the center, her cheek burning red, her cardigan rumpled from the scuffle, but her eyes steady. She did not resist. She did not raise her voice. And as the guards closed in, as sirens wailed faintly in the distance outside, she knew this was the moment she had been waiting for. The system had revealed itself bare and brutal, and soon it would face the weight of her truth. The wail of sirens grew louder, closing in until the red and blue lights flickered against the marble columns of Monarch Financial. Doors burst open, and two uniformed officers strode inside, their boots clicking sharply against the polished floor. The crowd parted instantly, phones still raised, recording every movement. "There she is," Preston Reed barked, pointing at Zora with unrestrained triumph. His suit jacket flared as he jabbed his finger. "That woman is committing fraud. I caught her trying to pass false documents." The officers approached swiftly, their cuffs already unclipped. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to place your hands behind your back," one commanded, his voice low but authoritative. Zora did not resist. She stood as still as a statue, her eyes focused not on the officers but on Preston. Her cheek still bore the sting of his handprint, but her presence radiated something stronger than anger. "Before you arrest me," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the stunned lobby, "I request to speak in the branch boardroom." The crowd stirred. The officers exchanged glances, unused to suspects making requests. Preston scoffed. "Boardroom? You're not negotiating your way out of this. She's wasting your time, officers. Cuff her." But from the corner of the lobby, Bryson Walsh, the branch manager, stepped forward. His polished smile faltered as he read the composure on Zora's face. Something about her tone unsettled him, the certainty, the authority tucked beneath her calm words. "Perhaps we should hear her out," Walsh said carefully, masking his unease with a veneer of professionalism. Preston turned on him, incredulous. "Are you serious? She's a fraud and you want to give her the dignity of the boardroom?" Walsh's jaw tightened. If she wants to incriminate herself, better it happens behind closed doors, not in front of the entire lobby. Reluctantly, the officers nodded. "Fine, but make it quick," one muttered. They escorted Zora into the boardroom, a glass-walled chamber meant for executive meetings. Preston followed, radiating arrogance, while Walsh trailed with unease. Zora walked calmly to the head of the long mahogany table and set her folder down. She pulled out her phone and dialed. "I'll need you to bring the documents. Now," she said softly. Within minutes, the boardroom door opened again, and a sharply dressed woman strode in, Zora's attorney. She carried a leather briefcase that she placed on the table with a deliberate thud. The eyes of every person in the room tracked her movements. Preston sneered. "What is this? Some stunt? Officers, don't let this distract you. She's wasting time." The attorney ignored him. She opened the briefcase, withdrew a thick envelope, and slid it across the table to Walsh. "These," she said, her tone crisp, "are the finalized acquisition documents for Monarch Financial. As of 3 weeks ago, my client is the majority owner and chairwoman of this institution. Every branch, every desk, every account is under her authority." Walsh's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the paperwork. His eyes darted across the signatures, the seals, the dates. Each line confirmed what his instincts already feared. He looked up slowly, his composure cracked. This can't be right." "It's very right," the attorney replied coolly. "The board has been briefed, the executives have been notified, only this branch had yet received public confirmation. Until now." The silence was suffocating. Then came the first gasp, Preston's. He staggered back as though the air itself had betrayed him. His face drained of color, his lips parted, but no words came. For all his bluster, for all his arrogance, the realization struck harder than any slap ever could. The woman he had humiliated, accused, and struck in front of dozens of witnesses wasn't a fraud. She was his boss. She was the owner. Zora finally spoke, her voice even but edged with iron. "So, Preston, you slapped the hand that signs your paychecks. You called the police on the woman who holds this bank's charter. Tell me, what does your protocol say about that?" The officers shifted uncomfortably, their cuffs now hanging useless at their belts. One cleared his throat. "Ma'am, do you want to press charges?" Zora's gaze never left Preston. "Not yet." Her words sliced sharper than accusation. The room held its breath, suspended between shock and reckoning. Preston's world was collapsing, and every second of silence reminded him that he had no control left. The guards who had encircled Zora earlier now avoided her eyes. Their authority shriveled under the truth. Customers beyond the glass walls pressed closer, straining to hear, their phones raised higher. For the first time all week, the power dynamic had shifted, and for Preston Reed, the humiliation had only just begun. The boardroom door creaked open, and the silence inside spilled into the lobby. Curious customers craned their necks, phones still raised, capturing the faces of those who emerged. Bryson Walsh looked pale, his composure cracking like thin glass. He stammered half-formed words, none of them coherent enough to explain what had just been confirmed. His eyes avoided the crowd, as though the weight of their stares might crush him. Preston Reed, however, was unraveling in plain view. His once confident stride faltered, his breathing came in sharp bursts. His hands twitched as though searching for something to hold on to. The arrogance that had fueled his performance minutes earlier had drained, leaving panic in its place. Meanwhile, Zora stood tall, her cardigan straightened, her cheek still marked from his hand. The red imprint remained, but her voice carried authority that could not be bruised. She looked first to the officers who had nearly cuffed her. "Am I still under arrest?" she asked evenly, "for entering my own bank?" The lobby seemed to exhale as the question hung in the air. One officer cleared his throat, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "That won't be necessary." The second officer glanced at the phones, capturing every angle, and added, "We'll step back. Clearly, there's been a misunderstanding." The word misunderstanding stung the ears of those who had watched the slap, heard the accusations, and seen Zora surrounded by guards. Whispers spread like wildfire through the lobby. Did she say her own bank? She owns it? Wait, is that true? Within seconds, the whispers traveled faster than the marble columns could contain them. Social media notifications buzzed in pockets and purses. Livestream captions raced across screens. Bank manager slaps black woman. Turns out she owns the bank. The staff froze in place, their expressions etched with disbelief and shame. Tellers lowered their eyes to their keyboards. A receptionist chewed her lip, realizing the appointment confusion now looked like complicity. Even Vivian Mercer, the loan officer who had delayed Zora the day before, gripped her pen tightly, color draining from her face. Preston's panic deepened as he caught sight of the glowing phones, the murmuring crowd, and the officers retreating. He stepped forward, his voice cracking. This isn't official. Documents can be forged. She doesn't belong here. She's lying." Walsh turned sharply, his patience snapping under the weight of exposure. "Enough, Preston. The paperwork is authentic. The board confirmed the acquisition weeks ago." His voice trembled, but the words were final. Zora's gaze never wavered. She stepped closer to Preston, her tone clear, unshaken. "You struck me. You called the police on me. You attempted to strip me of dignity in a bank that belongs to me. Tell me, Preston, what excuse will you offer the world watching right now?" Preston's lips opened, but no sound emerged. The weight of dozens of eyes, the glow of recording screens, and the knowledge of his own arrogance bore down on him until his voice deserted him. Zora turned to the officers once more. "You may leave," she said calmly. "Your services are no longer required here." They nodded quickly, eager to distance themselves from the spectacle. She pivoted then, facing the staff, the customers, and the endless cameras. "Effective immediately," she declared, "Preston Reed is suspended from his position as customer service manager of Monarch Financial. His actions today, striking a customer, calling the police without cause, humiliating a black woman in public, are violations of both human decency and corporate policy." The words hit harder than any slap could. Gasps echoed. Customers murmured in approval. Phones captured every syllable. Preston lunged forward, his face flushed with desperation. You can't do this in public. We have procedures." Zora's eyes cut through him. "You ignored procedures when you singled me out. You ignored policies when you demanded excessive documents. You ignored the law when you struck me. Don't talk to me about procedures." The crowd erupted, some clapping, others whispering furiously. A woman in line muttered, "About time someone called it out." Zora adjusted her folder under her arm, her posture unyielding. The bruise on her cheek was visible, but her authority eclipsed it entirely. "Let this be clear," she said, sweeping the lobby with her gaze. "This bank will no longer operate as a fortress of exclusion. Discrimination is not policy, it is poison. And today, that poison is being cut out." Social media feeds surged. The story was already viral, hashtags forming faster than employees could blink. Preston's name trended alongside words like racism, justice, and accountability. Preston, trembling, looked around the room as though searching for rescue. But no one moved. Not Walsh, not the staff, not even the customers. The only sound was the endless clicking of phone cameras, documenting his fall in real time. And in that moment, surrounded by truth too heavy to deny, he understood. The career he had built on arrogance had ended with a single slap. That same afternoon, the top floor of Monarch Financial's headquarters filled with the hushed tension of an emergency board meeting. Executives, directors, and senior managers filed into the mahogany-paneled boardroom, whispers circling like unsettled air. The viral videos had already spread across every major platform. The board knew what the world had seen. A black woman slapped, humiliated, and accused in her own bank. Now that woman sat at the head of the long, polished table. Zora Timberlake's presence was unmistakable. No cardigan, no plain blouse. She had rearmed herself in the armor of her office, a tailored navy suit, her signature glasses, her braids immaculate once again. Her very posture declared what none of them could ignore. She was not a visitor anymore. She was their leader. One director cleared his throat nervously. "Miss Timberlake, the footage has gone global. We've received inquiries from regulators, media outlets, even shareholders. This situation," Zora cut in, her tone firm, was not created in a single day. What you saw in those recordings is the symptom of a deeper disease. The room fell silent. She slid a stack of notes onto the table, each page filled with her observations from the past week. 3 visits, 3 opportunities for your staff to uphold the mission statement this bank claims to value. And on all 3 occasions, what did I encounter? Dismissal, excessive documentation, coded language about risk, and finally, violence. She let the word hang in the air, heavy and undeniable. Violence against a black woman seeking nothing more than the services she was entitled to. A few executives shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided her eyes. This isn't about one employee, Zora continued. Preston Reed may have delivered the slap, but every person who watched silently, every manager who enabled biased practices, every executive who ignored the red flags, each one played a part. The directors sat rigid, unable to argue. The evidence was already public. The world had seen what she endured. Zora pressed on. Effective immediately, this institution will undergo sweeping audits. Every branch, every desk. We will review loan approval histories, account opening patterns, disciplinary files. We will identify exactly where systemic bias has taken root, and we will tear it out by the root. One executive attempted a protest. That could be disruptive to operations. Disruption, Zora replied sharply, is what you witnessed this morning. Customers leaving your lobby in disgust. Millions watching online. Shareholders questioning your reputation. If that isn't disruption, what is? No one spoke again. Zora leaned forward, her voice steady but commanding. Mandatory retraining will begin across all levels, not the shallow seminars you host once a year. Comprehensive, ongoing education. Accountability metrics tied directly to performance reviews. Anyone unwilling to comply will no longer have a place in this institution. Her gaze cut toward Walsh, seated at the far end of the table. His polished exterior had melted into nervous sweat. Branch managers who perpetuate or ignore discrimination will be removed. Bryson Walsh, your tenure at Monarch Financial ends today. Walsh's lips parted in disbelief. Miss Timberlake, You watched, Mr. Walsh, Zora interrupted. You let Preston degrade me in front of your staff. You looked the other way because it was easier. That makes you complicit. He slumped in his chair, the weight of dismissal settling over him. Finally, she turned to Preston. He sat further down the table, pale and trembling, his arrogance stripped away. Preston Reed's actions speak for themselves. There is no place in this bank for violence, bias, or public humiliation masquerading as procedure. His employment is terminated, effective immediately. The words struck finality into the air. Preston's eyes darted desperately, but no one came to his defense. His empire of intimidation had collapsed in less than a day. Zora gathered her notes, her tone softening but not losing its force. This bank was built on exclusion, but under my leadership, it will be rebuilt on equity. We will not repeat the sins of the past. The directors sat in chastened silence. They knew the truth. Their new chairwoman had just redrawn the future of Monarch Financial with unflinching clarity. And outside those walls, the world was already celebrating the fall of a man who thought power was his to wield forever. The empire Preston believed he controlled had slipped from his grasp in less than a day. By evening, the footage had circled the globe. News anchors dissected it frame by frame. Hashtags trended. Comment sections overflowed with outrage, solidarity, and disbelief. People weren't just talking about Preston Reed. They were talking about what his behavior revealed. The ordinary cruelty that had been normalized in institutions meant to serve all. And through it all, Zora Timberlake remained steady. Not because she had wealth, not because she had power, but because she had lived long enough to know that racism doesn't always bare its teeth in back alleys. More often, it dresses itself in suits, sits behind polished desks, and hides in procedures that bend conveniently depending on who is asking. That morning, Preston thought he was defending the sanctity of his bank. He thought humiliation and intimidation would secure his authority. But the truth had overturned his stage. The bank was not his to defend. It belonged to the very woman he tried to disgrace. There's a lesson here, one that cuts deeper than Preston's downfall. Sometimes the most powerful act isn't shouting in rage or striking back with force. Sometimes it's holding steady, letting arrogance reveal itself, and unveiling the truth at the precise moment when silence can no longer protect prejudice. Zora understood this. She knew that firing one man wouldn't end systemic bias. That's why she ordered audits, retraining, structural change. She didn't just punish, she exposed. She didn't just protect herself. She opened the door for every future customer who might walk in without prestige stitched into their clothing. And still, her calm words lingered more loudly than Preston's shouts ever could. They thought they arrested a black woman, the headlines whispered. They discovered they'd handcuffed their future. Those words echoed far beyond the boardroom. They became a reminder that wealth does not shield black people from bias, that dignity is too often denied until someone forces the system to reckon with its reflection. But dignity is not a gift. It's a right. And when it is stolen, it must be reclaimed. So let me ask you, what would you have done in Zora's place? Would you have stayed quiet? Would you have fought back with anger? Or would you have stood tall, calm, and unshaken, letting the truth strike louder than any hand ever could? And if you believe in stories that confront prejudice, expose injustice, and remind us that dignity is priceless, then like and subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ. Every voice, every view, helps us shine a brighter light where others would rather leave shadows. Zora Timberlake walked into Monarch Financial as just another woman, modestly dressed, carrying nothing but paperwork and resolve. She walked out as a symbol of accountability, her name forever tied to a reckoning the bank could no longer ignore. That's the kind of truth worth telling. That's the kind of courage worth remembering.